Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So today, during research for another video recently, I came across something that was written by a bishop, Catholic bishop, and apparently there's some grief around Romans 8, where the message in the meaning. So sometimes they talk about translations, and they specifically talk about the translation of the King James Bible versus the Greek, or in this consideration, most likely Hebrew. And typically the translations are pretty great in the King James Version with use of concordance. You actually, in the concordance, you have the Greek and the Aramaic and the Hebrew text there with it and the direct meaning of the text. And sometimes the meaning can be swayed a little bit, but let's talk about this verse real quick. So this verse that we're talking about today, which apparently was a consideration of confusion within the Catholic Church here recently, or with Catholic parishioners, is what it looks like, is kind of talking about what Paul wrote. So in this experience, it suggests Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for the good to them that love God. All things work together for the good to them that love God. That's Romans 8:28. And the thinking there is this is kind of a spiritual or Christian, every cloud has a silver lining type verse. But I would go a little bit further. The Stoic thought process around it would be experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. And that might be a little too blunt. But here's the thing about the Bible. It's not a promise of comfort and good being. That's not what it is. The Bible is the directions and the law book and the table of contents for the life that we live. Some lives are going to be shorter than others, right? Some people are going to come across things that are extremely awful. Some lives are going to turn into some things that are extremely awful. I was talking about a young lady last night with a family member that cares greatly about her, and was asked to pray for this young lady, which I already was, and will continue to do so. But what we have to understand is God has a will, right? And if you do the best you can to perform and conform to God's will, and what that means is we can't know God's will. When I was a young man, I was dating a young lady that thought that she knew God's will, and she and some other elders in her church, which were all females, which that is what it is. Whatever your church does, that is what it is. But in the Bible, it says specifically that women aren't supposed to fill those roles. That's not a sexist thing. It's a biblical thing. And the Bible is the rules set forth to live this life. So either you follow it or you don't. I don't get into back and forth about it. It's either you follow the rules or you don't. And if you don't, you get things like this. And in this situation, the elders, females in this situation, were suggesting that another female leave her husband because of some things that they deem was inappropriate, which is completely against the Bible. But so is the fact that they were elders. That's against the Bible as well, because the Bible does say that, y'all. It does say that women are not supposed to occupy leadership roles in the church. Now, my grandmother was a Sunday school teacher, and I got a lot of what I know about the Bible from her. I actually read a piece in a book one time, and this is a little off subject, but I'm going to say it anyway. This book, Imagine Heaven. One of the stories in this, the guy died, and as he was descending into hell, he realized that's what was happening, and he looked down below him. And this is what's interesting about that book is many people have the same death experience, and they were brought back for some reason or the other. And as he was descending into the lake of fire, he was looking below him and saw nothing but flames, and knew at that point that he wasn't going to heaven. He was headed another direction. And I mention this because my grandmother was a Sunday school teacher, and in those classes we sang the Jesus Loved Me song every day. And this gentleman, apparently he's probably my age, and that was how he was raised as well. And so in this descension into the pit, he started singing Jesus Loved Me, because that was all of the Bible he knew. He said, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the... And he kept singing the verse over and over again. And in the story, he says he looked up, and then this bright light came in front of him, and he couldn't see the face, but he knew that it was Jesus. And he basically was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Just give me another chance." And Jesus basically said, "Go then." And like that, he woke up in the hospital, and then other people were present and can confirm that he did. And he was screaming as he woke up, "Just give me another chance, just give me another chance." So if you're interested in stories like that, which I am, this book is a good one. This is a recent book, but there's other books like this, and I know I'm getting off the subject, but hey, it is what it is. That book suggested this one. It's called Life After Life. This was written by a gentleman that was not a Christian. He was a scientist and a PhD at that, and he started seeing the relevance and the frequency of the stories that people were telling, and so he became a Christian himself from that. And this is another book on death when love dies, which is a little different type book. But it's like this: if you're going to study the Bible, you got to understand that translations or not, if there's a slight alteration in translation from one language to another, that's fine. Words mean different things, and overall, the Bible is a positive book. So if this verse, and what I mean by that is this: it's a law book that if you follow that, you can get strength by faith, you can have consolation by faith, you know that you have forgiveness by faith, you know that if you're a Christian, your name is in the book of life. Once your name is in the book of life, it cannot be removed. That means God is preparing a place for you in heaven. Okay, that's what that means. So once you're a Christian and your name goes in the book of life, it can't come out. If you're a sinner, which we all are, the wages of sin is death. We all are going to die. We don't deserve heaven, but we have that through Jesus. That's the salvation through Christ Jesus, if you have that belief. So when you're reading verses in the Bible, there's people trying to have controversy around a verse. It's very simple. How do you read it? What does it mean to you? When I read Romans 8:28, it says to me, all things work together for the good to them that love God. What that means at the end of the day is if you're saved, then all things do work for you to the good of God. Because no matter if you're sick, if life goes bad here, this is a very brief time. One of the interesting things about this book, too, is this. Three different people, when talking to someone after this life ends, right, whether you believe these stories or not, all these people have been vetted. Most of them are very credible people from what I can tell so far. They have no reason to lie about this incident. The brain did stop, which was proven. They did die, and they were brought back. All of these people in these incidents talk about knowing this time that we're alive on earth, as the time of choosing. So that's what it's called. It's called the time of choosing. And in this book, I read it in another book too. I don't remember which one it was at this point. I do hunt things down around this subject because it's interesting. If you want to know about, what everybody wants to know about what comes next and what's after, and the Bible tells you what comes next and what's after. But it's nice to see some of those confirmations and some of those questions that come from people that believe a certain way and those that don't. And I'll tell you this story, and I've gotten way off subject here, but this is where the video is going, so I'll say that. The Bible, to me, is a positive thing, and I read this verse as a positive thing. And this verse, once again, is Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good to them that love God. And I'll say this. My mother was an RN and a hospice nurse for years. And she told me one story decades ago. I bet it's probably been 30 years ago now, or 35 years ago now, that stood in my mind forever. And there was this lady that grew up in a town. I grew up in a small town. And there was this lady that grew up in that town, and she was pretty awful to people. I think she was a teacher and a librarian, and she was pretty horrible, and she treated people poorly. She treated her husband poorly. So, he died young. God gave him some grace, and he got out of the picture pretty soon. And the kids from this lady, they ran away, and they got far away from her, and got away from the negativity that was that. Because if you can't fix it, the way that you can honor your father and mother is get away from them. If they're driving you to wrath, if they don't let you have peace, if they try to drive division in the family, that's biblical. That's what you're supposed to do. But think about the honor of the father and mother. God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them with his own hand. God's hand wrote the initial 10 Commandments. And one of those verses was honor your father and mother. So in the instance, if you can't do that in a close locale, what you do is you get away, and that's the best way you can honor them. Once the pain and the loss is gone for you being far, far away, the suggestion should be that, at least from a Christian standpoint, it's a harmonious existence, because they're existing in their portion of the world and you're existing in yours. You've forgiven all the nonsense between the two, but the separation is then supported through the biblical intent, right? So this lady, that was the situation too. And anyway, this woman was dying in the hospital, and she kept looking up in the corner, and she kept saying, "Is that here for me? Is that here for me?" And so my mother, being a hospice nurse, and the other hospice nurses, they were saying, what are you talking about? Because this woman kept screaming, she kept hollering, she kept looking in the corner of the room, and so death means different things to different people. In the Origins videos, we talk about different tribes and what they believe, and the harbingers, and who comes to get you. And in Valhalla, if you die at war, if you die in war with a weapon in your hand, that's the piece. Your hand has to be holding your weapon, or in the act of utilizing your weapon. Then the Valkyrie will come and get you and take you to Valhalla. Well, that's what those folks believe. I read a meme the other day. It was pretty funny about that. It was like, you remember in the time that you're passing away in hospice that only those in combat will go to Valhalla. So you throw a sponge at the hospice nurse, which was humorous. But to get back to the story at hand, we all believe something's going to happen. Reapers, the Grim Reaper, death. This has been something that's been personified for millennia for all of humankind. During the period of Black Plague, it was a doctor's plague mask, which had a big beak-like nose that came out here. And it did that because they covered their face in leather so they couldn't breathe in the germs. And they were breathing basically the recycled air and the hot air inside of the mask. And at the end of that long nose, you would put stuff in there that smelled good, because all the people that were being eaten alive by the plague were rotted, and you had those things going on. So that was the picture of the doctors coming to see if someone's to be tagged black, which means they were dying, and the place was to be quarantined for a period of like 31 days, 36 days, so that would pass away. But that's kind of the pictures of death. So back to this story, this woman was sure that there was something in the corner of the room up top that was going to she kept looking up at the far corner and kept looking at the far corner and saying, "He's trying to get me, he's trying to get me, he's trying to get me." And so they sedated her and got her to relax. And this was an evil woman in life that did horrible things. And finally, the nurses went back in there. She pushed the nurse help button and then went back in there. And she was, staring up at the corner, just freaking out. And they said that her feet, she had ripped the covers off, that her feet were hot to the touch. And it was a great story to hear that as a kid, but you're thinking, my word, this person is living it before they're even gone, right? And so finally this woman passed away, and when she did, she had this great face of fear, looking in the corner and seeing what was coming. So here's what I say about death, and I've gone way off of this subject, but it kind of paints the picture that I'm saying about this. I did a video earlier around the Bible is not controversial. It's one of two things: either you believe it's the Word of God, or two, you believe that it's not. It's just another book. Well, also around your time of death, you get to figure that out. And I've been around people that have died many, many times. I've been the last person sitting next to them when they did pass. I've been speaking with people when they passed before. And the eyes that you see on a person kind of tells you what they're doing after the fact. You can kind of see the last thoughts around those souls when they're leaving the body. There was a young man that was killed in a car accident, and I was a first responder at the time, and I responded because it happened right in front of me. And he was a 16-year-old kid, and this was probably 25 or 20 so years ago. It's 2002-ish, maybe 2003-ish. And he was driving a little Mitsubishi GX, which were fast cars, but they were very light. And it was a little two-door coupe. And he had gone across the median. I watched the wreck happen. He lost control of the car, and he was racing a Mustang. I just remember thinking how stupid it all was. And they both zoomed past me very quickly. And I wasn't driving slow. I was driving an Impala at the time. And he lost control of his car, and it went across the median. And then one of the strongest cars on the road at the time was a little BMW 3 Series. And that BMW 3 Series, in their lane, were doing 60 miles an hour too, and they T-boned this guy. He went right across their lane, and they hit him. just bam. And so they hit him on the passenger side. And when I got to the vehicle, I was a first responder, so I was required by law to respond because it was right there when it happened. I was wearing a white shirt and a black tie. I always remember that. I worked for a company there, and I was a sales manager for a region. I had a regional sales position, which I enjoyed. And I got up to the car, and the doors, I kid you not, were not even maybe a foot to 14 inches apart, door to door. So the car had been crushed under the front end of this BMW, which I had already helped that woman out of the car, and she was fine. The BMW did exactly what it was supposed to do. The engine compartment folded this way. The engine went down underneath her, and she was brought up by the impact. So the car took care of her greatly. And so I had put her on the side of the road and made sure she was okay, and then I'd gone back to see the boy because the boy was in the worst shape, and you could see that walking up. And so I was stabilizing his C-spine with the seat of the car, and I was leaning on the door of the car, and he was trying to hit me with his arm, but he had no power. He didn't know what was going on. And I said, "Bud, just sit still. Just sit still." And he wasn't really responding. And so I started thinking in my head, this kid's going to die. Should I talk to him about Jesus? Should I try to do something to help him with where he's going next? And all I could do from a medical standpoint was to keep his C-spine isolated and keep his airway open, which is all I could do. I couldn't open the door. They had to cut him out of the car. And when the EMTs got there, you turn it over to someone that's more qualified than you, and that's what I did. When the EMTs got there, as soon as my hands came off of him after they put the back of the collar on his neck, and they were going under my hand to put the front of the collar on, and I was holding his chin there. I could hear him take that last breath, and they call it a death wheeze. If you've been around people that die, there's an exit of air through their lungs and from their mouth. Some of it will go into their stomach, and he did that, and I knew at that moment he was dead. And the instant I looked at his eyes in that instant, and all I saw in his eyes were trepidation and fear. And now that could be because he was young. And see, here's the thing: when we're young, we think we're invincible, but we're never promised another day of life. Okay. So when I read the Bible, I take the positive from it, knowing that how I live my life and what I do impacts how that's going to go for me. So I can read all things work together for the good of them that love God, because even if it's the end, I'm going to a better place. So it's still the good for the love of God. Even if that's a horrible, painful death, I still know I'm going to a good place. And that's the piece that I would say about the verses in the Bible. And, the Catholic Church was making a big deal about this because they say, well, you have to have more of a Jewish viewpoint than a Stoic viewpoint. The Stoic viewpoint is experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. It's meaning you get a yield for every effort that you do. Stoicism is one of my favorite subjects. I always have books of Stoicism, laying around, and I always have the Bible on my desk and all of that. But I say these things to say this: when you take the Bible for what it is, it's gonna tell you from your own understanding and how you see things what you expect it to tell you. So that's why I tell people, when you read great books, these two shelves behind me in the middle, those are books that I read every year. They're just that good. And every time I read them, just like the Bible, I pick up something that I didn't pick up before, because where you are in life changes with every day that you live. So that's something I would put out there, is that as you grow, so does your expectation, so does your knowledge, and so does your comfort with your expectation and knowledge. And I'll say this too: I've been around quite a few deaths in my life, from family to strangers to people that had forced it on themselves for some reason or the other. What you believe matters, but when you're dying, it may be too late. So I've talked about the story of the thief on the cross next to Jesus, and he had Jesus right there, and got saved in that moment, and was told that day by Jesus that today he would be with him in paradise. That doesn't happen for all of us. So if this subject matter is in your mind, When I was a young man, there was a lot of people walking around wearing black and carrying around the works of Edgar Allan Poe as a Bible themselves. And I like Poe, it's good poetry. But they were very gothic, and then they came up with different names of those people beyond that fact. And most of those people look at death like it's an adventure because it's not here. And it is either way, but after that's eternity, right? So, what you think and what you believe matters. 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a guy who was a Satanist. And when I was talking to him, he told me about this carving, and he was very proud of this carving of a chief demon, Baal. Baal was an Old Testament god that people worshipped, second only to God. So at one point, he was the second, if you were calling it a religion, it was the second largest religion in recorded time at that time. And he had this carving, and he just kept saying it was amazing how they got the feathers so right in the carving. And he was looking for a place to display this in his home. And so he was telling me about this copy of the Satanic Bible that he got and how cool it was and how it was an original print and that the cover protector was still in good shape and all this. And so I asked him, I said, well, do you have a Bible to go with that? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, I asked him, do you worship Satan? And he said, no. I said, so who is Satan to you? And so he started to explain, but he kind of cut away because I think he thought, well, this Christian guy is going to try to beat me with his Bible and all this. And so I didn't. I let him tell me who Satan was to him. And it was very interesting to see how awkward his face got around that question. Now, this is someone that you walked up to, a stranger, me, and told me about how you were building this pulpit, if it were, or shrine, to this Bible that you have, which is the Satanic Bible, and you were telling me how you have the carvings that you put on display. I didn't ask for all that information. So I asked, do you worship them? And the word worship made him go, huh? And so you go back to the 10 Commandments we were talking about earlier. The first one is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And a lot of books get that confused too. There's one over there that's the guy's talking about the spiritual realm, and in that he brings out the verse in the Bible when in the beginning in Genesis, when God was creating the earth, it said we're going to make man in our own image. And in that book, he's like, ooh, there's multiple gods. Well, no. Once again, you don't understand the Bible. That's not multiple gods. That was God and Jesus talking. Jesus was the creator. He's the one that did the creation. He's the one that made all things. And people get confused about that because those Bible verses were not in Genesis. They're elsewhere in the Bible explaining how that happened. Christ, with his own tongue, said that he was the creator of all things as well. So when God was saying, let's make them in our own image, he was God the Father talking to God the Son. But a book got that confused, and then he wrote this big book, which is listened to on Christian channels and broadcast around Christian networks as a Christian book on how there's other gods. Well, no, that's not what it said. But the commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. So God requires that he be number one if you have other gods that you serve. But what people don't get is, and here's the point of that, what you put your attention on is what you get. So back to this verse, I don't think it matters that if you look at this as all things work together for the good of them that love God. I think that's a great way to read the verse. To the Catholic standpoint or the stand view, it says all things that work in, they said all things in works perform to the good of God, suggesting that all things works with is what they said. So the verb Paul used doesn't mean works to as in the King James. It means works with. The 1952 Revised Version got this right, but changed some other bits in the verse, so the eye didn't catch on. But what Paul was saying, two things King James Version missed it said. First, he's saying that God who works all things together for good, not that all things we're doing is under their own stream. Second, he was explaining how God does this. Specifically, he does it in collaboration with certain people. He recruits human beings to share his purposes in this world. So that was the point of the verse. Now to get back to the Satanist story. And that commandment, thou shalt not have any other gods before me, it's not saying that you shouldn't have any other gods, but my point to you is why not worship the one true God and be free with all the other. However, Idolatry is something that people don't understand. So let's say this. If you're into idols, you have them all around your house, then you could be worshiping idols if you spend more time on those idols. If you're a Christian, you should spend more time reading the Bible than you do on your idols. You should spend more time praying than you do on your idols. Well, think about this. How much TV do you watch? Some people worship politicians. They talk about nothing but politicians. Some people worship sports idols. We even call them idols. And then there's TV shows, the American Idol, right? So we've gotten to a point in culture where we treat idols as if they're cool, which is awesome if you live forever. But if you're not saved and you get to that point of death that I'm talking about, what looks going to be on your face? What are you going to be thinking about? What does your eternity look like? If you're curious about subject matters like this, the one on the spiritual world, I forget the title, but these books, two I would say take a look at if you're interested in these thoughts. Imagine Heaven is one. I'm sorry, it's a glossy. That's by John Burke. Imagine Heaven. And then the one that's a bit older is Life After Life, and that is by Raymond Moody, MD. Over 13 million copies of this book have been sold. And remember, this guy was not a Christian when he started. He was by the time he got done with the book. And this guy is a Christian and is a pastor. And he was lucky enough to learn that early on. And then this How to Go On Living When Someone You Love Dies. That's by Therese Rando, PhD. It's very interesting in here. I've mentioned in the past, from a performance standpoint and how people live their lives, typically people with faith are happier and feel more fulfilled and are more sturdy. They can go through more things. They can go through a tough time for longer because they have that faith. In that book, the same thing when people die, and it even goes into children death and things like that, stuff that we don't talk about because it's so awful, but even goes into that to tell you how Christian faith sometimes can hold things together when that happens. I've known and counseled with probably a dozen families now that have lost children, and I'll tell you, typically the marriage doesn't last after that. So it's a good perspective to read some of that if you're going through something like that. It's a good perspective to read these other books if you don't have an intent or a thought process around death, and if you are sick or in some of that and it comes to faith, I hope you choose the faith path that's going to take care of you after the fact. And to everyone else that's young and healthy or strong and healthy, no matter what age you are, if you're not thinking about the next life for a portion of time, if you think your 100 years on this earth is all that you are, then I would tell you to look at science. Science says that energy, just like mass, cannot be created or destroyed, which would suggest that you go on forever. That's what science teaches. So if science teaches that and the Bible teaches that, and if you've ever seen a person die, and when you look at their body, you look at that vessel and you see that their eyes are empty and they're no longer there, how can you argue with that understanding, right? If you've been protected from all these things and never had to think about this, great. But still at some point, it's going to be in front of you. So that's, didn't know the video was going to go there, but this is a subject matter that I wanted to bring up around the Bible and different churches' thought process around the Bible. It's very simple. The Bible is a book of law. How you live your life is going to determine how you read these verses. So when people go back and forth about this verse means that or doesn't mean the other, it really doesn't matter. And apparently this is a big thing of contention for a lot of folks that go to are going through some tough times. It says all things work together for good to them that love God, Romans 8:28. The Bible doesn't promise you're going to have a free life of free of pain and free of anything other than joy. If you think that's the case, then read the book of Job. The book of Job is very long, and basically God had his children there talking about the angels, and in that conversation with the angels, Satan said, well, of course Job's going to do fine because you won't let me do anything to him. And God told Satan at that point, try. Job is a worthwhile, wonderful Christian person. He said believer and strong in his faith. And so Satan got after Job and destroyed his life, destroyed everything. And through each awful situation, Job continued to be grateful and continued to worship. And Job's a long book. I mean, by the end of the book of the Bible, called Job. If you want to read it, take a look. I feel awful for the guy, because what I do is I put me in his place and just think, my word, the stuff he's going through. He loses his family, loses his wealth, loses his everything, and then gets it back and loses it again, and then his health fails, and he's got, this pestilence upon him, and it's just, he stays faithful through it all. And I say that because nowhere in the Bible does it say the Christian life is going to be a life that's free of pain, that's free of illness, that's free of harm. It doesn't say that anywhere. This old black pastor, was talking about the book of Job and said, don't think God hates you because you're going through a lot. Maybe your name just came up in conversation talking about Job. That was one of the coolest things I ever heard said, because Job was worth it, and in the end he was vindicated and justified and brought back whole. But at the end of the day, he still lost all his family and went through that whole situation. But that was just part of his earthly life. That was this 100 years, right? Maybe, if you get 100 years. So now Job's in heaven, and has been for 1,000 years since this story was written and this story was told. So that's kind of the point, is that this is a temporal area. This is a temporary plane that we live on. So I would say, and I would wish for everyone, to seek out the wisdom that you need that makes you feel properly about things. And a single verse with people going back and forth and arguing about it, and the Catholic Church trying to contest the King James Bible, and we've already talked about that. They tried to prevent it for nearly 100 years and killed people. Over 10,000 people were killed because they didn't want the King James Bible being in people's hands. They didn't want an English version of the Bible being freed upon the world, is what it was. They wanted to keep that Catholic hold on the Bible. And let me say this, since we talked about it. The Roman Road is on all of my videos now in the notes. It's in the detail down in the description. If you wonder how you become saved, it's in the description on the videos. So take a look at it there. But the reason I say this is the Catholic Church likes to teach people through deeds and through Hail Marys and through all this stuff that we give you, you get to grace and you get to God. That's not the case. And part of salvation says that you are saved through Christ Jesus and nothing else. So if you're going to a man or a person for affirmation, confirmation, and forgiveness of your sins, you're doing it wrong. And in doing that way, it also suggests that you don't believe in the way that's required for you to believe to be saved. So I would say, read the Bible the way you think. Look at that Roman road to salvation that's in the details, and see if that's not what it says to you. Because it'd be awful to think people being led astray and gone down the wrong path and then don't actually have salvation at the end times. And that Bible verse where Jesus says, move away from me because I never knew you. That might account to a lot more people than what we think. So that might be worth looking into if you're someone who practices faith in that manner. Video went a bit long, but I think the stories in it are good. They're stories that have stayed in my mind for decades. The books I suggested, we've gone over the Bible, King James Bible. If you want to seek out verses that don't know exactly where they are, get you a Strong's Concordance. I've talked about it and showed them many times on the video. I have 3 or 4 here in my home from different times. But yeah, I wish you the best around that. Please think about these things. And if you like content that is like this, context and content of this nature, I will start adding a lot more, I think, here in the future around specific Bible verses, because the Bible's not confusing, okay? It's not controversial either. You just have to read it and then pray about it and have a concordance. And if you have a question about things like that, hit me with the question here. Put it in the comments, put it in the notes. Reach out to me. People do from time to time. Some of these videos come from what people have asked me about, or most of them come from recent conversations I've had. And you may be, how do you have all these conversations? I'm a business consultant. I own a couple of businesses, and I spend time talking to people in those places. So it gives me the opportunity to have different points of view and to have different feedback on those points of view. So that's where that comes from. But hopefully you'll get something from the video. Hopefully you'll get something from the content. When it comes to the Bible, just stay in it. You have to read it and pray about it. That's how that works. I hope this is useful to you. I'm Ben. Please subscribe and be good.